Okay then. So, greetings and welcome to today's educational program, Pursuing a Smart Energy Future, a discussion on carbon, poverty, and the role of data in the energy transition. This is Doug Wood with the ASQ Quality Management Division, joining the program today from Fairway, Kansas. We also want to thank the ASQ Energy and Environmental Division for locating the speaker and topic, and then also providing valuable promotional assistance. Today's program is being recorded. Any views expressed in this webinar are for general educational purposes only and do not represent any official views or positions of the sponsoring or the presenters' organizations. A video recording link of today's program will be available via the email 24 hours after the webinar to attendees. This email will also document your RUs or recertification units for attending this event. So we're looking forward to your great comments and questions during the program. And we invite you to shut off your cell phone, close the door, warm up your fingers, and give us your great input. We'll have a Q&A window, which is a good way to send it in. You should have a Q&A window visible on your screen. We'll also have a chat window if you want to use that, if you're more comfortable. The Q&A window is a little more convenient, though, for actually doing questions and answers. So to begin, we have the pleasure today of hearing from Derek Tinker. So please join me in welcoming him. Derek helped form the Switch Energy Alliance, or SEA, in August 2016 after completing a master's degree in petroleum engineering at the University of Texas. Derek is the Director of Technology at SEA and an acting Schlumberger Fellow. SEA is an Austin-based nonprofit whose mission is to inspire an energy-educated future, building on a global energy film, Switch, which has been viewed in over 50 countries by 15 million people. SEA develops world-class films and videos and serves them via state-of-the-art web delivery. SEA has programs that reach kindergarten to 12, higher education, professionals, and the public. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Derek. Derek, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Doug. Hey, I want to thank ASQ for having me on today. Hopefully we'll have some fun. A little bit of time for questions too at the end. I'd ask everyone to hold. We got a lot to get through and a little time, so here we go. Now, a disclaimer, I'm not a professional speaker. I'm a software engineer with a background in physics and engineering science. I run a web development team that curates data sets to work to present them cleanly through the web in line with professional video content. It's a lot of code, not stuff that we would want to talk about, so instead we're going to talk about energy because it's cooler and a lot more relevant to the world today. But also support the real expert on this matter, Dr. Scott Tinker, professor at the University of Texas. He's one of the leading experts on energy and has devoted his career to advancing energy education in the world today. I support him and his message, and much of what we'll talk to is due in part to his work over the past 30 years. And yes, we share a last name. I'm his kid. So let's just get started. I'm going to start here with the world. Let's think about some big things, right? Here are a dozen issues that are giant in the world today. Take a look at that list and ask yourself, what's the one thing that all the others depend on? What impacts everything else? And I'm a bit biased, but I'll argue that it's energy. You can't do any of the other things. You can't solve the other problems without energy. So here's where I'm going to end. 4 big things. Energy improves lives. Energy poverty exists in the world. We need to end it. We got to minimize the environmental impacts of all forms of energy because they all have them. And we have to support energy education because it's dramatically needed in the world today. So with that, let's start. Climate and poverty. So here's a map of the world. It's where people live. Population density. You can see there's some big white areas, circling them. There aren't many people here on these parts, these continents, and there's reason why that is. Keep those in mind because now we're going to look at global income, the economy. There's some gray areas. There aren't that many people. So they can't figure out how much these parts of the world make because they don't make much money. There are not many people there. Now, if we start with the yellow color, that's less than $1,000 a year, $3 a day. That's severe poverty. Let's go up to $10 a day, $4 grand a year with the red. They're mostly in these areas, other parts of the world too. And there are wealthy people in these parts of the world, but mostly here. We just visited a lot of these countries for our second film, Switch On. Here's some children in Ethiopia looking at a massive new dam that's being built to power Ethiopians, half the country of Ethiopia. Here's Colombia with the native Arhuaco people, where we brought first solar to an indigenous village there. In Vietnam, where we're going to power their economy with coal for the next 20 years, 50 new coal plants. And here we are in Nepal looking at clean cooking, and in Kenya, the largest slum in Africa called Kibera outside of Nairobi. There's over 1.2 billion people living without energy today. Now, if we continue up the economic scale to $12,000 a year in blue, more than 12 grand a year, that's still just $1,000 a month, or a lot more depending on where you live. And look at the blue, look where they are. It's pretty selective, not broadly distributed, that kind of wealth. And in fact, if you put North 20 and South 20 latitudes on here, it's interesting. The blue kind of falls outside, and the yellow kind of falls inside of those latitudinal bounds. Coming back to our map, we might ask, well, maybe it's because of population. It turns out it's not. There's plenty of places in the world with dense people that are rich, and there's also places in the world with dense populations that are poor. Let's look at a different map. The temperature of the world, the average temperature today. Now we're seeing something. There are places where it's really hot, people don't live, or really cold. But how about where's the wealth? Oh, that's right. The yellows and the greens, just right. Not too hot, not too cold. Where it's poor, it's hot, and this is in degrees Celsius. And there are people who are concerned, I'm going to blank out the rich parts, that those who live there will be severely impacted by global warming, climate change. And they will. 2 degrees Celsius is what we're targeting. That's about 10 degrees warming in those regions. Makes it even less inhabitable. But Houston's uninhabitable in the summer. I'm from Texas. Without what? Without energy. Right? We need our air conditioning. Stockholm, Sweden. It's uninhabitable in the winter. Without what? Without energy. Or light, because it's dark there. See, if we look at another map, one of the world at night, we can see where the lights are on. This is a composite map of a satellite photo. There are areas with no light that we talked about that are too hot or too cold. And guess what? Look where it's rich, the lights are on. In fact, if you look at a plot of nocturnal luminosity at night against GDP, it's a pretty interesting trend. Not perfect, but these are all the countries in the world plotted on here. Where is it poor? Where the lights are off? India. They're kind of weak lights. They have a grid there, but severe poverty still. So back to our tropics, and we can ask ourselves, yes, warming would impact where it's warm today, but what would impact them even more is energy. Getting them energy so they can control their climates just like we do and learn to read, food, clothing. First thing you get with electricity is actually a cell phone, communicate. It's time to power the people. The 3 kinds of people in the world today, those who are good at math and those who aren't. Which 3 are you? Do some simple math. Here's what the average Ethiopian consumes every year in kilowatt hours. Now, that might not mean anything to you, so here's my fridge for perspective. You see, my fridge consumes 9 times more than the average Ethiopian person and 3 times more than the average Kenyan. And I have 2 fridges because I have somewhere to store my beer. That's energy poverty. And how many people live this way? 1 billion. 1 billion without electricity. The trend is all right, but what does 1 billion people look like? Here's a map of the global population. Every color is about 1 billion. So if you think everyone you've ever seen in the Western Hemisphere and throw in Australia and New Zealand, that's about 1 billion people. No electricity. We're not evenly distributed in the world. In terms of population, at least. How about clean cooking? Another major issue that we're exploring in Switch On. 1/3 of the world, 2.5 billion people. It's actually 2.6. That's a lot of people cooking inside with wood, dung, coal. Lung diseases. That's a big issue. And 3 million people a year die from breathing smoke inside their homes. That's more than malaria and AIDS combined. But it's very solvable. We have techniques of bringing liquefied natural gas that can help to solve these issues. If we think about the economy, the environment, and energy, they're intricately woven, right? It's called the 3 E's. Dr. Tinker speaks on this around the world, and it's very complicated. You can't understand or underestimate the complexity when you start thinking about the environmental impacts, and not just the climate atmosphere, but land, air, water. There's huge environmental challenges with energy, poverty and competition, growth, fossil, nuclear, and renewable energies. And then you wrap them all into social, legal, and political systems, and it's all very interactive. We call it radical because, and here's the radical middle. It's kind of radical because it's lonely. It's easier to be out there in your own sector, lobbing things in, talking about how dumb things are, or your frustrations in whichever sector you're in. But the reality is that in order to solve some of these issues, we have to compromise where there's data, or we might not be right. It's where the action is. It takes critical thinking, pros, cons of different subjects, and there's a certain flow, right? Really, energy underpins the economy, and the economy, when it's healthy, allows you to clean up your environment. Here's Kibera, outside of Nairobi where we filmed. If you look closely, you can see 3 kids coming home from school. And that's garbage that they're walking over. The poorest in the world have the worst environments, the worst water, the worst air, the worst land, because they're more focused on life's needs, right? So let's look at the energy mix. Let's think about this problem. Here's the same map we've seen before, population distribution. Here's the world's energy mix today. By the way, all these energy slides are color-coded. Coal is gray, natural gas is red, oil is green, hydro is blue. 85% of the world still gets its fuel from fossil fuels. And does it vary around the world? Absolutely. North America has a little more natural gas, red. Europe looks just like the world's mix. Russia, a lot of natural gas. South America, hydro with topography, rainfall. Africa, more gray. Middle East is going to be a shocker. It's oil and gas. And then look at Southeast Asia. Look at those colors. Back up. There's 4 billion, almost 4 billion people underneath Southeast Asia, half the world's population. And they get half their energy from coal. Not electricity fuels, that's total energy. Let's shrink and grow these to be proportional to demand. Now, that's how much is actually consumed in these regions. That coal in Southeast Asia is more than the rest of the world combined, times 3. So here's the mix. Has it changed through time? Yeah, it's changed. Everything's gone up. Now it's grown 365% since 65, but look at the proportional changes. Coal and oil less than the growth, hydro, nuclear, natural gas, and more. Natural gas is the most, over 5 times in that time period, and there's reasons for that. What else is growing? Well, we are. Population of the world is now approaching 8 billion. We're headed towards 10 or 11 billion. And who consumes energy? We do. Correlation is absolutely causation here. We consume energy. Now where? Well, it turns out 80% of the world live in Africa or Asia, 80%. That's 4 out of 5. They consume less than half the world's energy. The rest of us, 20%, we consume more than half today. So you'll hear that the wind, or the world could be wind, water, and solar if it were just for political will. But by when? That's the question. So we took this model out to 2065, made it 98% solar. Wind and hydro, how's that look? Some are saying we should do it by 2040. How's that look? I mean, I worry that the same people who think that that's possible might need to sound like this, or my favorite. Like, thanks, show you what to do if you swallow a hanger. Maybe be 75%. Maybe 50%. Maybe even be 25%. In other words, All the new demand for energy as the impoverished world develops comes from renewables, and what exists today is still fossils, declining. But people would call that business as usual, extreme business as usual, that particular scenario. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at that business as usual and compare it to the global energy mix and see what it looks like. Is it business as usual? Well, there are the units. It doesn't really show much. Let's take a look at the same data, the same exact data as a percentage. Energy mix globally, same time period, same data, but that's the mix. Right? 1965, 78%. Coal, oil cut in half. 2065, natural gas, nuclear, doubled. Renewables go up fourfold, almost fivefold. Is that business as usual? The right side of that doesn't look anything like the left. It's going to be hard to deploy that much infrastructure, and it's not easy. Now let's look at it differently. Geologists love ternary diagrams. Each corner sums to 100%. They help to visualize trends. Here we have the types of energy broken into more carbon, more hydrogen, and then renewables, where we have been in the last 50 years. So this is the actual data. Every circle is a year of the global energy mix. So over 50 years, we've migrated away from carbon towards natural gas and nuclear, made a little bit of a turn, and doubled the renewables. Right? So let's look at our cases. Look at 75% case, not 98%. Let's just look at 75. Where would that fall in this plot? Right here. How about 25%? That's a faster change than we've done. It's a turn. It's not really business as usual at all, right? And somewhere in there might be our future. So now we see it a little bit more clearly, and we're thinking critically. It's important to ask, can the world energy mix actually be fully renewable? And if so, how long is it going to take? So let's talk about electricity. Now, here are the biggest consumers, electricity by country in the world. There's China, the US, the expected players, big economies. But who's missing? Who's number 3? Kind of a trick question. Turns out it's my industry, the tech sector. Okay? The tech sector consumes more electricity than any nation on earth except the US and China. And they will pass us. I mean, if you don't believe it, just look around. Literally everyone has handheld ultra processors today. You know this thing called the cloud? That's not a cloud. Mr. Bezos' company, AWS, you know what it's underpinned by? Massive data centers, all running on electricity. By the way, in the last 3 years, the cloud has since doubled. Bitcoin, man, get ready. Let's look at it by region. In North America and Europe, we've been flat in electricity consumption for 2 decades. We grew a lot in that time, but who's increasing power consumption? No surprise, Asia, a lot. This is 1985 on the left hand. You know, there's a kink when China took off growing their economy. And here's the rest of the nations and continents, not that much. Remember, they're pretty poor and their per capita is low and their total is low. Right? Where does it come from? It comes from coal. We burn coal, boil water, and make steam, turn a turbine, run a generator. It's still increasing globally, kind of leveling out. But it comes from burning oil, still in some places, and from natural gas as well. The fossil thermal energies make a lot more of the world's electricity. In fact, the kink in demand is made up partly by that. It comes from nuclear, which is still growing. China has 50 reactors now, same as France, and growing. Hydro. Hydro's doubled, 3/4 in China, 25 gigawatt power plant there. Now let's put solar, wind, and geothermal, and then biomass and others. And that's your mix. That's how we're powered today. We don't get it from a plug. We actually had that answer before. Where does electricity come from? From the wall. It's like, no. We've had to make electrons. We don't grow them. We don't mine them. Gas has gone up 5x. So let's look at coal. Who's coming down? The US and Europe. It's coming down in our coal consumption, way down in coal. But we built our economies on coal. So look at China. Look at Asia. They're growing their economy on coal too, and then the rest of the world, not much. There's all four sectors. Not much coal because they don't have much energy. How about natural gas? A little different. Natural gas has been growing up steeply. It's spread across the different sectors. Everybody's using natural gas now to make electricity. Right? In fact, if I take coal and lay natural gas on top of it, the gas to coal ratio has changed from 38 to 61%, and it's still increasing globally. The demand for methane continues to grow, which is a good thing. So solar has been growing more steeply than anything, exponentially. And you'll hear that, and it's true. You'll hear the cost of the panels have been coming down, and they have. Here's the cost coming down tremendously. The panels themselves, though, not the system. In fact, to a point now, there's not a lot of headroom to go much further. Some efficiency, but not too much more. Wind has been growing exponentially, and the costs are coming down. It's actually fantastic seeing those transitions. Now, here's the total electricity by fuel. I'm going to lay wind on top of that. You can see wind is growing more steeply than our electricity demand in the world, and that's true. So a statement will then be made by your favorite people that wind will soon replace fossil thermal because it's growing more steeply. But what we're missing here is a pretty important concept in the energy discussion. It's getting cheaper, it's growing steeply, but what's missing here? What's missing from the conversation? Here's a hint. Scale, right? So let's scale the wind the same as global electricity. Here we go. There it is. Remember the orange light, the orange wet on top, that's wind. It's right there in the data. I mean, is wind going to replace oil and gas and coal to make electricity anytime soon? In 10 years, in 20 years? I don't know, all right? And look, I love wind. I come from Texas. We actually make the most wind in the United States, but the reality of the transition being that quick, because we're producing the best wind, it's difficult. So we need to think a little differently. Can wind and solar and batteries really address climate change? Let's talk about electric vehicles and a use case in transportation. We're hearing a lot about electric vehicles. Here's an EV on the left. It's a Beamer. License plate says electrons. It's awesome. Charging with diesel. Those are diesel tanks making electricity right there. We've lost the thread. Now, EVs in the world are growing exponentially as well. The production is over 2 million a year. Now, who makes the most? Well, there's the data. Who makes the most EVs? It's China. That's the light blue, more than the rest of the world combined. Where does China get its electricity? Well, we just looked at the data from coal. Now, are China's EVs clean? Doesn't matter. I mean, it really matters. How you charge the battery really matters. You're talking about atmospheric emissions. Nonetheless, Bloomberg says we're going up to 60 million a year in the next 21 years by 2040. Here's the actual. Now what's missing? Take it with me now. Just set it scale, right? Let's scale to the actual figure. And here we go. There's 2 million against 60 in 21 years, growing exponentially. And then it starts to roll over to the pink colors. Other? I guess other are going to have to make those EVs. But about half of them in the world, how many EVs are under the curve? 600 million, if Bloomberg is right. 600 million? How many vehicles are there in the world today? It's 1.2 billion. That's converting half the world's fleet to electric vehicles in 21 years. That would be interesting. I mean, how many batteries are going to go in those EVs? Not the battery pack, the actual batteries. How many batteries are in your Tesla? The nice Tesla sedan, lithium ion, the size of your cell phone. There's 7,200 in one car. So I'm going to use 5,000 to make the math easy. 600 million times 5,000 is 3 trillion. If I count, it take me 96,000 years to get to 3 trillion. And by 1001, 1002, 1003, punch it in your calculator, you get 3 trillion. It's a huge number. Where do they come from? Where do those batteries come from? We have to ask ourselves this. Where are all of those batteries going to come from? There's mining, right? They love mining. No. I mean, all the stuff that goes into batteries comes from mining, and to go from tens of billions of people in the world for our phones to 3 trillion is going to take a lot of mining. How many people think mining is green? We don't grow it, we mine it, right? I have to be doing a lot of mining. Let's zoom in. This is in Montana, just north of Butte. Took this picture. Get way into this pit because it's huge. That rig, that little rig right there, you can actually see that's a 16-story building for scale. And that color bar, we're not going to put a miner here for scale. Actually put him down there. And there he is walking over to the rig to get busy. These are massive, massive plants, right? So the critical thinking question is, are hundreds of billions growing to trillions of new batteries sustainable? Is it good for the environment, right? The cobalt, lithium, and other cations and anions that we're going to have to get from the earth to make those batteries, is that sustainable, right? Let's talk about environmental impacts. Where are the batteries going to go and when they wear out? Where do you put your cell phone when it wears out? I mean, really put it. Not where you say you put it. Where are 3 trillion batteries going to go? Landfills? All right. Some will be replaced, recycled, or processed to get something out. They're going to go in landfills, though. How many people think landfills near the surface is green? I mean, if you don't think mining is green, are electrical vehicles green? I mean, what does green really mean? In the case of EVs, CO2 emissions, which some of them have less depending on what they're charged with. How about nature? The land for the mining of the land is the disposal, the manufacturing. The point is, at scale, it's a tough problem. Good and bad, clean and dirty. What are the impacts? So let's look. CO2 emissions. This is the size of the rectangles are proportional to the actual amounts. Industry makes a lot. Transportation makes a lot. Heating, cooling, makes a lot of CO2, right? The power gen, talked about this a lot. And by the way, forestry, ag, make almost as much as power gen. So you can feel good when you're eating your salad. You're making CO2 as well. We all are. In fact, we focus on the power side and transportation side because we can see it and maybe capture it, particularly in the power sector. But we haven't focused on this. What's this? This is the greenhouse gas emissions from the internet. It is. From the internet, right? Streaming it right now for this webinar, there are 300 million tons a year, and it's increasing more steeply than just about anything. And every time you fire up a video, some electron somewhere is turning in the cloud, letting you watch it. On demand to YouTube, even porn. I mean, if we scaled that to this figure, it's 1.5 times global trains, and it will pass shipping. The tech sector. And another interesting thing about emissions, right? And where do they come from? Who makes them? Well, again, North America, Europe, have been flat for 40 years. Our CO2 emissions were coming down, actually. Where you heard that. But who's going up? It's China. Not a surprise. Asia, here are the other economies, not much yet. Middle East has some. Half the world's emission comes from Asia, though. Bad, bad Asia. I can't believe Asia makes all that CO2 now. But what do we get from Asia? Everything. And we've essentially moved manufacturing to Asia because we buy cheap products from Asia. How is Asia's regulation compared to ours for emissions? We bring in this stuff. What do we effectively send them? Carbon dioxide. They're making our stuff. It's not a local stream. It's not soil. It's not a lake. How many atmospheres are there in the world? And this is important to think about. There's only one, right? So sending all of our emissions to Asia, where there's less regulation, that's a challenge, right? It's not something we can continue to do as a solution. So how do you reduce CO2 in the world? Natural gas and with some carbon capture and storage, right? Nuclear, big time. No emissions, ridiculous efficiency. You got coal, capture and storage, and start replacing. Got to start replacing coal with natural gas, right? Geothermal and hydro if you haven't. If you have that resource, and not everybody does. Centralized wind if you haven't. We're developing the best wind first. Develop all the best resources first. Distributed renewables. Can't go to Gunchuka, Colombia and put in natural gas power plants. There aren't even wires there. Distributed renewable, solar mostly, some wind, pico hydro. And then finally, efficiency and conservation, right? We got to use less to do the same amount. We just waste so much energy in the world today. Now, why did I gray out the first three? Are those the solutions that those are the most passionate about climate change are putting forward to address it? Now, we've got to fix climate change with natural gas, nuclear, and making coal cleaner in the meantime, because those are the best ways to do it initially, right? And that's the problem. The paradox is that the politics are complicated because the solution isn't really what the people who are most passionate about it want. They want something else. So are solar and wind green and fossils dirty? Well, does oil and gas have environmental impact? Are you kidding? Tremendous impact on the environment, and always has, right? It's been providing 85% of the world's energy. Some are getting better, and some aren't, right? You mine, manufacture, drill, complete water, handling seismicity, moving around, massive infrastructure, refining petrochemicals. They have accidents and then they burn it. It really worries people. And they think they're in the running of the bulls, like this person. This is the winner of the last photo taking contest, by the way. I'm going to show you the runner-up. Just hang on a second. How about the clean stuff? Where do the panels come from? Where do the turbines come from? Where do batteries come from? The earth. They're low density. The sun and the wind. You've got to collect a lot of stuff to collect them and get them in forms that we can use and you can make to go online and do what we want with them. So panels, land use, nature used for collecting this stuff. We actually have 345 kV power lines in Texas to move it from where it's windy to where we need it. And finally, where's it going to go? The turbine blades that are being cut up in Wyoming right now, they've worn out. After about 18 years, they're very long into thirds and going into landfills. Only 900 blades. That's still the largest landfill in Wyoming. We have 13,000 blades in Texas. It's a different number. Almost 40,000 blades, right? So they're not that bad for the environment, not as bad as chemical, but they're going into landfills, right? So you got to ask yourself, the sun and the wind are renewable, but the stuff to collect them is not, right? And that's the challenge. So this is the runner-up to the last photo taking contest. Hey, look what I got. So here we are, the radical middle. And are we going to continue to do this? Are we going to let ourselves get polarized? Understand that's what's wanted, I guess. But disappointed with both sides, because in reality, we have to come together. We need to require them not to polarize. Are we going to get in here where it's tough? Look at the data, compromise, be wrong, start to address the real life challenges here in the radical middle. We have to end energy poverty. It's wrong on so many fronts. It underpins a global economy, right? Coal, the gas cleanup of fossil fuels, we have to reduce those. We have to continue to increase nuclear and renewables where they make sense, but make sure that we understand the environmental impacts of all forms, and then understand how to bring all this together with energy. So you end up with a much more sustainable transition. It's not what's being talked about today. It takes a lot more research and education to get us even close in the public. Right? It requires nonpartisan energy education and critical thinking. So, is the global energy transition really from fossil fuels to something else? No, I think that's a political statement, right? Here's the world at night again. So what are they saying? Now you know why the lights are on. Where there's energy, there's light. And what's being said, let's keep 85% of it in the ground, right? That's what this would look like. Right? We dim the lights in the world by 85%. Here we go. Let's keep them in poverty. Right? It actually hurts the environment. What allows you to invest in the environment? What are the cleanest environments in the world? Healthy economies. They have to have energy. So if we turn the lights back on and lift them from poverty, watch Africa, just for a thought experiment, light that up. Can you imagine hunger, shelter, clean water, education, rights and empowerment of women who are cooking inside, immigration, migration, issues, population, environmental investment? All these things change when you get energy. Yes, there's work that goes along with having that much energy as they grow to 2 billion people this century. But can you imagine the world's lit up, what it would be able to do, right? That's how we change the world. So the transition is not really about fuels. It's about the improvement of the human condition and the broad environment. Both. We have to have a transition the way that does this, not for the other. Here's the transition. In reality, that's how we're going to actually change and understand. We have to be willing to come in and make these discussions. So my organization, the Switch Energy Alliance, we make all of these slides and many, many more slides available for free, along with Dr. Tinker, who talks about the specifics on each concept. And there are also 50 other experts on our site that explain the intricacies of different topics that you may be interested. We also have our entire first documentary, Switch, and soon the second documentary, Switch On. Everything's free. So think about exploring it a bit. It's important, learning and then talk, because the real change doesn't happen in a vacuum or in a courtroom. We got to build the radical middle. And finally, a small plug for my team. If you like the site, if you go to it and you are interested in getting involved, reach out. Right? We're always looking for web developers, people to help us, build it more. This was built by a couple people, and it's underpinned by SQL and Neo4j dual database with a Laravel server and JavaScript on the front end. So if you're interested in getting involved, we have definitely have the need for technical help. So thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate the time, and have a little bit of time for questions.
Oh wow! Thank you, Derek. That was truly a remarkable presentation. So it's time for comments and questions. If anyone has any questions, you can post them in the Q&A box on your screen, and Derek will answer them. We'll work our way through this, so we'll give people a chance there. So Derek, when this has been presented, what sort of responses have you gotten from leaders, business leaders, or political leaders?
It's usually surprise. And you know, I tell you the truth, I listened to my dad speak on this around the world, 2 leaders. He actually he followed President Trump, which was interesting, in a speech recently, and the response has been surprise, right? Because here we are looking at the solutions to climate change, and they're not what we're hearing about. And so it's going to be a challenging transition, but we actually have to start talking about these unexpected things, because right now in the time that we are, I think that people are overwhelmed by the amount of information around it. And so it's just going to take some digging into more research, really digging into the things that, you know, when you struggle with a concept, when you think about it, you got to think about it harder and look at sources and challenge yourself to read more, right?
Okay, we've got a couple of questions here. One of them says, you know, the fossil fuel, it must be finite. Will the alternative to fossil fuel become mandatory in 100 years? What have you found on that?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I've got a couple of slides on this, on the amount of fossil fuel, we call them reserves, left in the world, and it's drastic. How much we have not used? It's something like we have used something close to 5% oil in place in America alone. So we're not going to run out of fossil fuels. Economics will push us out of fossil fuels. We just need to make sure that we're environmentally conscious, more so than we have been, because right now the demand is still driving forward, even though in the United States and the Western world we are recognizing the challenge of climate change and the challenges of the impacts. In the impoverished world and in China, India, where economies are growing, that demand keeps on going, right? And so they're not really looking at which fuels they're using. They're using any fuel that they can get their hands on, because their people need the energy, right? And so whether or not we want it to happen, the energy demand continues to grow. So we got to find solutions, because we don't have good energy storage yet. And I have a couple of slides on that, but didn't include them today. Because we don't have good solutions for energy storage yet, which would make renewables a little bit more feasible at a large scale, we have to think about how we can transition with what we have in a better way.
Thank you. One of the slides you had back there was your refrigerator compared to.
Oh my gosh.
And one of the comments was, well, should we be using as much refrigeration as we do? Could we shut off our refrigerators? I think that gets back to your radical middle chart there, right? I mean, you shut off all the refrigerators. How are you going to feed everybody, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, and when we went down, I led a group down to Colombia. I showed a couple pictures there. We had 25 engineers, students, who went down to put in first solar. We wanted to, this is in the film, it's what they call a running story throughout the film, the second film, which will be coming out. And we put in first electricity into an off-grid village who had requested it. And the interesting part was that what they wanted first, and they had no grid access, no running, I mean, these are tribal people. What they had requested first were fans and lights in their communal center and a community fridge, right? Because they needed a place to centralize that cooling, and actually that fridge was not going to be used entirely for food storage. They actually have a setup that is used for vaccines. It's called a vaccine refrigerator. It was a Gates Foundation funding, and the engineer who invented it was leading our team. It was really neat. But yes, we will and can continue in the Western world where we can afford it to increase efficiency in refrigerators, but that's not being focused around the world, unfortunately. So I think that we need to make sure we understand where demand is coming from and try to impact it in all those sectors. Right?
Okay. Yeah. Another question: what technologies or provisions do we have for safely decomposing the batteries that we're putting in these electric vehicles? Is there a path for that?
I'm not really sure. I don't know the answer to that question. There should be, shouldn't there?
Mm-hmm.
I know that there are safe ways to recycle, quote unquote safe ways to recycle, but with that many batteries, that it seems difficult, right?
Yeah.
If it were to grow at the rate of projections, the thing that I wanted to make sure to point out is that the projections seem unlikely. 600 million replacing half the fleet. It seems unlikely, but also further beyond that, what would the impact of that be? And nobody discusses that. And electric vehicles seem to get a free pass. So I'm not saying that electric vehicles aren't great. I'm a huge. I mean, I've gotten to drive one. I can't afford a Tesla, but I would love to own one because they're fun. They're great for sitting driving in some cases. But when you think about the magnitude, the scale of the global fleet in the world today, that's where the reality of the change has to happen. And I don't think electric vehicles are the solution to climate change. They're a neat new technology, but they just get baked in with everything else. So there are no free passes, and there can't be. We got to stop thinking in good and evil, good and bad. We have to think there's energy in the world, and how can we bring people out of poverty? Those numbers that we looked at, 2.5 billion people without cooking. I mean, the magnitude of the environmental impacts of that statistic alone is unfathomable. So if the biggest thing we can do to help affect the environment now is to help lift those people from poverty. And they're beginning to do it, but we need education, right? So that's why we're making a film.
Okay, great. One question came up here, and unfortunately, we may not be able to get to everyone's questions.
Sure.
There'll be an email address in the note that you receive in 24 hours, which you can address your questions to. So we'll see that shortly. One final question there, I think, is very pertinent. Besides tech-related volunteer opportunities, are there any other volunteering opportunities to get involved? Is there any other way that you can invite people to be a part of what you're
Absolutely.
promoting?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for asking that. So I actually work closely we have a teacher advisory council because we are piloting in 2 days a platform for education on video-based education on energy. We're working with the National AP Environmental Science Board to create the energy curriculum in video-based tools. And the AP Environmental Science teachers are writing the curriculum themselves around videos, which is really neat. So if you're interested, or if you know teachers, science teachers who are interested in getting involved with helping us create that, we're happy to bring people in, even if it's so little as testing and promoting. I mean, this is an initiative that they are very excited about. I mean, we had 25 of them come in to Austin for a whole summer seminar, and just the energy around it, no pun intended, was really neat to be a part of. So I'm excited about that. That's kind of been my project. A lot of code, but it's it'll be fun and fascinating to see where people take it. So if you have more questions, like Doug said, we actually have a team of experts that can address more technical energy questions. I know I do my best on the energy side, and I enjoy talking about it. I grew up around it. but we can actually address them. Dr. Tinker could get to them as well. So.
Okay, sure. I did post that email address in the chat window if people want to copy it out of there. info@switchenergyalliance.com. So I guess there's one more question here, okay? Alice asks, don't you think we waste a lot of energy? Traditional cars will have to be replaced eventually anyways.
Yes.
They don't last
Absolutely.
forever. So why not build EV to buy once we need a new car? Isn't that a step in the right direction?
We are doing so, right? And the trends show it. I think that so what I didn't show, we had a couple of other plots that could have shown, was the increase in demand for energy. Right now, China has increased by 40% in the last 20 years their vehicle fleet. They went from 10 to 42 million in the last 20 years. India is currently, they have almost the same population as China. India is currently sitting at the same place that China was 10 years ago. And so they're looking to grow just as fast as China did because they have the same number of people. They're trying to get their people powered up, and they can't. Most of those people can't afford electric vehicles. Shoot, I can't afford an electric vehicle. And I live in the States. Most people in the United States can't afford electric vehicles because of their cost. So while they are a diversification of the energy source, the reality is that it's not going to be able to catch the rate of the global fleet in demand. So yes, we need to continue to use them where they make sense. Inner city driving is fantastic if you have access to an electric vehicle. But across the country, electric vehicles are not good, right? They wear out, and we don't have any way to charge, right? So it takes systems, infrastructure to be able to support that kind of transition. But the reality is that takes energy to put in place too. So you put all that together, and now we start to understand that, wait, what's the benefit of doing this when there are challenges in either way? And I'm not arguing for not looking at it and not continuing to develop new technology at all. But I don't want people feeling duped when we don't meet our climate demands because of the proposed solutions that are seemingly great. You know, they're awesome. It'd be great if we had realistic solutions, but we actually have to be realistic about what's going to affect the emissions, right? So.
Okay, so I think I speak for everybody. We've all learned a great deal about the energy future, energy present, energy past, and energy future.
Sure.
Your talk was very informative. I want to thank you so much for this. So I guess it's kind of time to end our program.
Sure.
Again, thank you all. Please email them to the posted email address if you have more questions. You will get an email in about 24 hours. It will indicate your 0.1 recertification units earned for this event. Also, the email will have this email address in it again for sending questions. And we'll also put a link to the Switch website, for you to look at the videos they've offered there. So again, thank you, Derek, and thank you to each and every one of you for participating. We wish you well. We hope you stay in touch. And with that, we will say goodbye for today.
Thanks so much.